Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. Today, we're dedicating the whole program, not exactly the whole program, but most part of it, to an interview with Michael Tim. Michael Tim has been to Kardec Radio. He was previously here, which actually was last year, to talk about the Titanic and the spiritual take on it. Now he comes here because he has just released a new book entitled Leonora Piper, How Science Discovered the Afterlife. Leonora Piper was an amazing medium, a medium who lived in Boston, though she was not born in Boston as many people think. She was actually born in New Hampshire, and then she moved to Boston because she got married to a Bostonian man. And once she was there, she got to be renowned for her mediumistic abilities, so much so that she attracted the attention of the renowned professor at Harvard, Dr. William James, and many other men of science, including in Europe. So we have a lot to learn, also because in Brazil, the current president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, Cesar Perry, he also wrote a book about Leonora Piper, though it's still in Portuguese. So here we come to share with you about a special moment in history when a medium attracted the attention of science. She was investigated and researched upon very extensively. It's very interesting, very fascinating, and many questions are in our minds regarding why still, after so much evidence, people resisted to giving in to the phenomenon. Well, we have a lot to share, and Michael Tim is here with us to talk about that very fact in humankind's history. There's a lot to share also because in this program, we're going to have beautiful segments. Kardec Radio responds a question by a listener on how to develop mediumship. Many people come to spiritist centers and they are willing to develop their mediumship. Well, they're most welcome, but one thing is for sure, there are many ways in which we can address that question. Later, after Michael Tim, Kardec Radio responds about mediumship and its development. Also, Kirsten DeMello will tell us more about the law of preservation in the Spirit's book. Luis Sergio Marotta is going to unfold the beautiful new understanding on the chapter 1 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, followed by questions 37 to 49 of the Spirit's book, the recording by John DeRosa and Steve Shepard, and then Joyce Magalhães brings to us in Spiritism in Your Life, Charity under the View of Spiritism. At the very end, Bernadette Leal brings to us more insights about the parental detachment and the music Free by James Marotta. And of course, as you know, at the end of the program, we have beautiful prayers. So stay there because the program is just beginning, and it's a beautiful program because we're going to learn much more about not only Leonora Piper, not only about William James, but also about a beautiful account that was brought through Chico Xavier, through his hand when he was traveling into the United States, and he got an interview between Brother X, Humberto de Campos, and the very William James in the afterlife. Everything and much more. For the time being, we're going to kickstart the beautiful program with the message by Joana de Angelis, Doubt and Failure, in the book Living and Loving, and also CD. If you want to get it, just go to the SSB bookstore at www.ssbaltimore.org and get to know more about this amazing book and CD. After the break, Michael Tim with us to talk about Leonora Piper, How Science Discovered the Afterlife.
Chapter 16, Doubt and Failure.
To doubt is a healthy attitude when we seek a better understanding of the causes of things and situations. In scientific investigation, for instance, to doubt is a necessity until the findings are proved right. Schools of thought usually start with questioning in order to reach for new concepts and expanded information. Systematic doubt, however, expresses an imbalance of reason and generates emotional problems. As far as spiritual realities are concerned, no laboratory experiment has been able to prove that there is no intelligent life after death. On the other hand, there are facts that assert spirit survival to bodily death and its pre-existence to birth. Unstable people try to shun their assumed duties, excusing themselves with doubt, and do not care to persist in the search for spirit reality. A patient who doubts his own cure corrodes his mind with pessimistic thoughts and destroys the very elements which would promote health. Consequently, his pathological condition aggravates regardless of proper clinical treatment. A fighter who doubts his victory loses the combat before it starts. The farmer who doubts the potential in the seed and behaves carelessly will not see his plantation flourish. A business person who doubts the success of his trade gets easily discouraged and will certainly be disheartened by failure. Sometimes, doubt is an attitude of self-accommodation. The person tries to ignore new ideas and facts to avoid the need to change his way of living. Spiritual life and the interference of the dead in the activities of the living are realities taught by all ancient civilizations. The Spiritist doctrine, a legitimate heir to Christ's thoughts, has brought the essence of these teachings back without allegory, deception, or distortion. When confronted with problems of faith and behavior, examine critically the opinions presented to you, then study the teachings of the Spiritist doctrine to be able to discern more clearly. The laws of God are perfect, His providence merciful. Nobody is forgotten or spiritually orphaned. Liberate yourself from the petty conflicts of systematic doubt. A rational belief will open up new horizons for you. Doubt and disbelief generate great suffering. Remember what Jesus told the Apostle Thomas, who was doubtful whether the Master had really returned from the dead. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Available for purchase the book, This Obsession, psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier. In this book, the spirit André Luiz recruits new groups of workers of goodness whose intent is to aid in the readjustment of those no longer in the physical plane. Learn more by purchasing your copy at www.sgny.org.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Listen to our sister radio, Bazera Online Web Radio, retransmitting Kardec Radio shows 3 times a day. Also, beautiful and inspiring programs in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to www.spiritist.com.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
So, dear listener, we are here honored by the presence of our dear friend Michael Tim, who is the author of another new book about resurrecting Leonora Piper, How Science Discovered the Afterlife. It's a fascinating book. Michael Team has been at Kardec Radio program before, talking about the Titanic and the spiritual take on it. And if you want to know more about him, please go to White Crow Books and get to know more about him. He's a resident of Hawaii, and he's the Vice President of the Academy of Spirituality and Paranormal Studies and the editor of the Academy's quarterly magazine, The Searchlight. He has been a freelance journalist for more than 50 years, has been writing articles about the paranormal, and he's the author of other books as well, like The Articulated Dead and Running on Third Wind. Thank you so much for being with us at Kardec Radio today, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me, Vanessa. I appreciate it.
You know, it's fascinating because this book you've written and was just released in 2013 about Leonora Piper, she's so appreciated in the Spiritist movement, and she has been discussion in the Spiritist circles for many, many years. And now we have the opportunity of having a fair book that talks about her with modern language, and most important, I would say, with a beautiful context. What I like very much about your books is that you contextualize the phenomenon and the events at the historical time. So can you please tell us about what was happening at the time in which Leonora Piper was living?
The late 1800s, not a lot of people realize that this, about 1860 to 1900, was a time of real despair and hopelessness. The age of reason, the age of enlightenment had already caused people to start falling away or losing their religion, losing their faith, and then Darwinism, which came along in 1858, 1859, that was more or less the crowning blow. I mean, after 1860, at least the educated population of the world began completely losing their faith, and it just created what William James called soul sickness. There's just a lot of people that lost meaning in life. You know, there was no meaning to life. It was just a march into to an abyss of nothingness. So there were a lot of people that were in despair at the time, and that's what brought about the Society of Research in 1882. That a group of scholars and scientists felt that there was a need to look into these psychic matters. I mean, Allan Kardec and Judge John Edmonds and Alfred Russel Wallace and others had been investigating this well before 1882, but it wasn't, they didn't have the peer review committees and the strict scientific protocols that the Society for Psychical Research decided to have in 1882. And that's when Leonora Piper came along shortly after. Actually in 1885 is when William James, who was a psychology professor at Harvard, discovered her, and she was the first real she's not the best in the history of mediumship. She's by no means the best medium, but she's the most tested medium, I think. She was subject to strict scientific protocols, and so that's why she stands out, because she was studied extensively by the Society for Psychical Research beginning in 1885.
Exactly. And as you were saying, reading a little bit about her through your book as well, we got to know she was born exactly when Spiritism started, with Kardec in 1857. She was born in New Hampshire, and then she moved to Boston because she married a Bostonian man. But as you're saying, she's not the only medium of the time. The movement was widespread in the United States. There were many mediums, and her reputation became well-renowned after William James got interested in her. And if so, how did he get acquainted with her?
Well, actually, his mother-in-law and sister-in-law had a sitting with her. They all lived in Boston at the time, and so William James's mother-in-law and sister-in-law told him about this sitting in which a number of deceased relatives communicated with them. And, of course, William James is very, very skeptical, but he said, well, I'll arrange a sitting and see what happens. So he had a sitting, and some very evidential information came through to him. Of course, he realized, well, I'm fairly well known, so she could have researched this. She could have, found that out. So he wasn't convinced, and he had another 11 sittings with her over a period of 6 or or 8 months, and a lot more information came through that he felt couldn't have been researched, even if the person knew who he was and did an extensive investigation. So he figured there was something there. He just didn't know what at the time.
But Mike, is it true that William James also had a personal interest when he came to see Mrs. Piper for the first time? And I say this because some sources say since a son of his died, his mother-in-law advised him to go and see this medium. Is that also one of the reasons why?
I think so. One of the problems is that William James didn't document his first 12 sittings. He didn't see it as a scientific endeavor at the time, so the only documentation he had with Mrs. Piper came 3 or 4 years later, and he doesn't, he mentions his deceased son and some other relatives, but as far as what motivated him to go that first time, there are some indications that was a fact, but it is not well documented.
That's interesting. But can you tell us about the context in which these experiments happened? Because as you mentioned in your book, when you talk about the discovery of a white crow as described by William James, he was very scientific. He was trying to come from the skeptical perspective of it. Can you tell us about it, please?
A lot of people today who are familiar with the clairvoyant and clairaudient type mediumship that they see on TV with John Edward and Lisa Williams and James Van Praagh and so forth. I mean, they seem to think that all mediumship is of the clairvoyant type. But Mrs. Piper was initially a trans voice medium, and what that involved she would sit, and it would take her a couple of minutes. She would go into a trance state. Apparently her eyes would roll back into her head, or she'd start breathing hard, and her eyes would roll back, and then all of a sudden this different voice came through her, this gruff, totally, almost masculine, if not totally masculine voice would come through speaking, and that was initially there were a number of different recall spirit controls that came through, but the one that came through with William James was said he was a French physician, and he gave his name as Dr. Finet, P-H-I-N-U-I-T, and what he did is apparently very few spirits are able to communicate directly, or at least through that type of mediumship. So what Dr. Finet did is he would relay messages from these deceased individuals, loved ones, or whoever was communicating, through Mrs. Piper. He would in effect take possession of her body and use her vocal cords and pass on messages that came from these other. Now, occasionally somebody had the ability to take control of her body without the help of spirit control with Dr. Finet and the others that followed him. But for the most part, it was Dr. Finet who was relaying messages on to other people.
And was she conscious about the spirits that were communicating with her?
No, she had no idea what was going on. In fact, some years later, back in around 1910, she was interviewed by one of the New York newspapers, and they asked her if spirits were coming through her, and she said she didn't know. But she said she was inclined to think that it was a secondary personality. That was the big William James's big theory initially, that it wasn't spirits coming through; it was some secondary personality buried in her subconscious. And the secondary personality had the ability to read the minds of the sitters and feed back information. When information started coming through her that the sitters didn't even know, I mean, this didn't lend itself to the telepathy theory that, how could she be reading their minds if they didn't even know this information? So then William James and Richard Hodgson, who became the primary investigator, and others, they expanded their theory to one that said, well, that she has the ability to go to any mind in the world and extract information and feed it back, or else to tap into some cosmic consciousness or cosmic computer or whatever, cosmic soul they called it, and dig up this information and give it back, which, really seemed far-fetched, but the science at the time just didn't want to hear about spirits or spirit communication. It was very taboo, and it was considered a retreat to religion religious belief, and so this was a more respectable thing to say it was coming through telepathy or super telepathy, whatever they wanted to call it. And that was the theory for at least the first 6 or 7 years of Mrs. Piper's mediumship, until a new control came along. They called him George Pelham. Actually, his real name was George Pellew, but they gave him the name George Pelham just to protect his family, for privacy persons. But he knew Richard Hodgson, William James, and all the rest. He was a member of the Society for Psychical Research, and he died 1892. And about a month after he died, he started communicating. And initially, Dr. Finney relayed the messages on for him, but apparently called him GP, George Pellew. They just abbreviated his name GP. GP figured out how to do it himself. He didn't need Dr. Finney's help, and he began communicating, on his own, and actually took over as the control for Mrs. Piper.
But the question we have is also about her personality. I mean, aren't there elements there that would verify her reputation and the validity of communications not being something of other types of personalities?
Well, she was a very meek and mild-mannered Boston housewife. She grew up considered an average Christian for the time. She didn't believe in any of this. I mean, it was all new to her. Researchers found out, or came to discover, is that a lot of the information coming through her was distorted or colored by her own mind, that the communicating spirit had to, her mind entered into it somehow, and so there were words that were misinterpreted, and she might have put her subconscious might have put her own little twist on certain things. So it wasn't all completely accurate or completely accepted as the spirit having said that particular thing, but the gist of it in most cases was something that was beyond her knowledge or her comprehension. So much of it was good information. I mean, when information came through from other spirits that she had no knowledge of, that was quite evidential.
That's interesting. Mike, we're going to give a short break. When we come back, we'd like to know more about the conditions of research of mediumship at the time.
Okay.
We will return to our program after these messages.
A new masterpiece has just been released by EDI-CEI of America, Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira, a phenomenal book about what happens to suicides in the afterlife. Truly instructive, it brings greater hope that no one really dies or spends eternity in damnation. A true account of the mercy and providence of God. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Come for the beautiful event sponsored by the British Union of the Spiritist Societies. It is the second British Spiritist Congress on May 11th and 12th at the Quakers Friends House in London, United Kingdom. For more information, please go to www.buss.org.uk.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone, the online study of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel according to Spiritism. Spiritism for Everyone meets every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning using the latest technology in web conferencing. You can join in from any computer in the comfort of your home or office, no matter where you are in the U.S. or the world. Spiritism for Everyone is open, free, and requires no registration. To access the web live meetings, go to www.spiritist.us. Spiritism for Everyone is a program of the United States Spiritist Council.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are back with Michael Team, the author of the very book Resurrecting Leonora Piper. She is that renowned medium that was investigated by many great minds, including Dr. William James from Harvard. Mike, before the break, you were telling us about the experiences and the experiments of mediumship with Leonora Piper through the investigation of William James. Now, we've also heard the tough conditions of some of these experiments at the time with other mediums as well around the world. They were really being scrutinized from top to bottom. Is that true?
Definitely. There were, quite a few mediums that were being researched, and a number of supposedly fraudulent mediums that were exposed, although indications were that a lot of the so-called frauds were not frauds. They were really genuine mediums. It's just that the researchers didn't understand what was going on. They wanted some explanation that made sense to them in a materialistic way rather than a celestial way or a spiritual way, and it didn't make sense to them. So, they said, this person must be a fraud because we don't understand it. And I think that's one of the reasons why the early mediumship disappeared. We don't have that type of mediumship today, or at least we don't hear about it very much, is because I think the spirit world really put a stop to it. They said, too many good people are being disparaged because these researchers don't understand what was going on, and especially in physical mediumship. There was so much in physical mediumship that they didn't grasp that looked like fraud but wasn't really fraud. And that's why it just doesn't survive today. I mean, this research went on until about 1930, for about a little over 40 years, and then became a matter of reinventing the wheel for most of them, just the same stuff over and over again. And science still didn't accept it. They said, this has got to be fraud. Something's wrong here, and they would find something wrong with the person, and they just write it all off. And so little progress was being made, and that's why we don't hear about it today. I mean, if you talk to anybody today interested in survival that hasn't really studied this material, they'll tell you, oh, yeah, they exposed all those people. They were all frauds and so forth. They just don't know what was going on. But this was really Mrs. Piper and Gladys Osborne Leonard, who was called the White Crow of England, were probably the two best researched mediums in the world during that era, and they provided so much information that just is beyond dispute.
But it's interesting you're mentioning about how often these things happen today, and it's quite puzzling for us because, for example, in Brazil, we have lots of cases of this happening nowadays, and since like Chico Xavier's time and even before him. But I think it doesn't get to be much investigated by scientists nowadays. I think several reasons. I don't understand why. Even physical mediums that exist in Brazil, for example, who are renowned for even their, manifestations in general, including the healings, and they don't get to be investigated. Maybe because of language barrier.
Well, I think that's part of it, but there are physical mediums in the English-speaking world that science just doesn't want to touch, and part of the reason is that these physical mediums usually require darkness, and that doesn't lend itself to scientific study, so they just avoid it. And if they do investigate and they find something that conclude that is valid, then their scientific peers begin calling them dupes, or you didn't do a proper investigation, you missed this or you missed that, or somebody else goes in and finds something he didn't understand and calls this person a fraud, and then that reflects on the first scientist. So, I can understand why they just, it doesn't do much for their reputation if they go into it, because they're never going to come out with anything conclusive that's going to satisfy the skeptical scientist.
Yeah, that's right. And we had a program here with Chris Carter when he was mentioning that as well, saying that, scientific pathway today is so restricted to grants and to the things of frontier and fashion. You depend so much on peer review and other stuff that it becomes quite impossible for you to adventure yourself in fields of research that are not in vogue. So it's fascinating in your book, in so many of the cases, but the case of one of the people who researched as well, Mrs. Piper, Hodgkinson, and then he died and communicated through her. Can you tell the listener a little bit about this fascinating case, please?
Yeah, well, Dr. Hodgson, as I mentioned, William James didn't, after he discovered Mrs. Piper and had his first 11 or 12 sittings or whatever, he just didn't have time to, in addition to his Harvard employment and so forth, he didn't have time to be a full-time researcher. So the American Association, or the American branch of the Society for Psychical Research, brought over Dr. Richard Hodgson. He was an Australian who happened to be teaching law and philosophy in England, and they brought him over to be in charge. His title was executive secretary, but in effect he was the manager of the American Society for Psychical Research, and he became the chief investigator for involving Mrs. Piper. I think 2/3 of his job was investigating her, but he also investigated other things. He investigated her for 18 years, actually. The average three times a week he would sit with her. He would bring in the people. The procedure was that she was not to know who the person was. She got no names. He would bring. Sometimes she didn't even see them. She would be in one room, and he would wait till after she went into a trance. Then he would bring the person into the room, and he'd start recording what would happen. So it was strictly scientific conditions, and so this went on for 18 years. And
wow.
As I said, initially the first 7 years or so, he went along with William James. So this has got to be a secondary personality, or it's got to be some form of thought transference. And it wasn't until this George Pellew that I mentioned earlier came through, and Richard Hodgson knew him. Mm-hmm. And it was just too much personal information coming through from George Pellew, and that's when Richard Hodgson actually began subscribing to the spirit hypotheses, or the survival hypotheses, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, in 1905, when he was 50 years old, he died while he was playing handball at a Boston Boston gym. And within a matter of a couple of months, he too began communicating through Mrs. Piper with William James and Dr. James Hislop, who took over Hodgson's job. So he communicated for several years actually, and provided a lot of additional information.
Wow, that's fascinating. But what a woman, because and her husband as well, allowing so much investigation, and she was really a great subject for science to allow herself to be investigated day in, day out by several different people. And she even traveled to England to be investigated by other men of science, right?
Yeah. I mean, she was actually, this became a job. So, I mean, the skeptics will say, oh, yeah, well, she was paid to do this and so forth. And so it's not valid, but... And then, she got a couple of trips to England, or 3 trips to England, actually, and spent some time over in England being studied by Sir Oliver Lodge, who was one of the world-renowned physicists at the time, and Frederick Myers and other researchers. So, there was a lot that came out of it.
I mean, I remember reading your book, and at the very beginning, you mentioned about the fact that you've heard of Mrs. Piper before, you were impressed, but not as much as William James. But later, after decades, you realize that she's really quite a case for science in terms of proving the afterlife. What made you rethink Mrs. Piper, and what really made you see what William James saw in her?
Yeah, I think it's a difference between academic writing and journalism. I'm a journalist, and I know that I've done. I'm editor of the. You mentioned the Academy earlier on. Actually the name has changed. It's now the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies. They decided to change the name. I'm the editor for their journal as well as their mini magazine, and so I get a lot of contributions from the academic world, and academicians have a different way of writing than journalists do. I mean, journalists try and get to the point and not beat around the bush, whereas academics are long-winded and do more inductive writing. They start at the beginning. They don't make a point until the end. Can't figure out until the end what they're talking about. Journalists try to state it all in the first paragraph and then explain what was, what they said in the first paragraph. So when I read the initial reports on Mrs. Piper, was more the academic type thing, and a lot wasn't explained. I mean, for instance, William James would frequently say that Mrs. Piper seemed to be fishing for information, And so that turned me off to her right away. That, you know, why, if she's fishing for information, she must be a fraud. But what William James didn't say, and I'm not sure he ever completely understood this. I mean, later Professor Hislop and Hodgson did. She wasn't fishing. It was Dr. Finney, her spirit control, who was trying to interpret what the other spirits were telling him. He was getting thought images. I mean, that's what people understand. I think it's like talking on a telephone. But Dr. Finney was somehow getting these thought images from the other spirits, and he was trying to figure out what are they saying. And so his so-called fishing, he was fishing from, you know, trying to figure out what they were saying, and this was being interpreted by William James to say that Mrs. Piper was fishing. So little things like that really, you know, were confusing, turned me off initially because I didn't understand what was going on, and they never explained the difference between trans voice mediumship and direct voice. I mean, I had read some things about direct voice, and you know, it was never made clear by these researchers that, you know, the difference between trans voice and direct voice. And so I couldn't tell who's talking here. I mean, was it Mrs. Piper talking? Was the voice coming over her head like in direct voice mediumship? And so a lot of things just didn't make sense the first couple of times I read it. And, you know, as I pieced things together over a period of time and came to understand the difference between direct voice and trans voice and how the spirit control operates, then it began making much more sense on a third or fourth reading, and that was the purpose of my book. I figured I got to take all these things the academicians wrote about and try and put it into, you know, language that people will understand.
Of course, and it's quite well described, very interesting. The book's very straightforward, and it's quite compelling as well. As you mentioned before, she was really true to the whole phenomenon, and she wasn't a spiritualist per se, right?
Not really, not a spiritualist per se. In I guess in the broad sense of the word, that she, you know, she was not she wasn't a materialist, so she had to be a spiritualist, but she wasn't the type of spiritualist that you and I would define as a spiritualist or a spiritist.
Yes, and is it true that at the end, as she stated, you mentioned already, but as she stated that she's not quite sure who's speaking through her, if it's spirits, etc., is it true that she really dismissed her own mediumship?
No, she didn't dismiss it. She just didn't, you know, this was in 1910. She didn't know what was happening because she wasn't conscious of what was going on. She actually began to lose her ability to go into trance during that period from about 1910 to around 1920, and I think after 1920 she became more of a clairvoyant type medium. But by that time the society was no longer studying her, so whatever happened after around 1915 wasn't really documented. So we don't know that much about, you know, what came through her after, you know, 1915 or so.
And do you have any idea why she was losing her mediumship or shifting features in that regard? Because in Spiritism, the Medium's book by Kardec, he talks about hypotheses on why this may happen. Is it because she was charging? Is it because she was, you know, going above and beyond what she could actually do, even engaging some form of non-truth type of phenomenon, fraudulent one?
Yeah, there were indications that somewhere around after about 10 years of her mediumship, that some low-level spirits were beginning to take control of her, and in fact, that's when another change in controls took place. As I mentioned, Dr. Finney was her initial primary control, and then George Pellew came in and was the primary control for about 5 years, and then around 1895, I think it was, the Imperator group, which had controlled William Stainton Moses some years earlier, primarily a spirit called Rector, took over as her primary control, and he explained to Hodgson that you know, her body's just worn out and fatigued, and when she gets in this condition, that low-level spirits begin to find it much easier to get through. And I think that, you know, they corrected that for a time, but I think somewhere around 1910, the same thing began to happen, that more low-level spirits were coming through.
Mike, we're going to give a last break, and we have the ultimate question regarding this research on Mrs. Piper, okay?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We will return to our program after these messages.
The United States Spiritist Council invites you to the 7th U.S. Spiritist Symposium to happen on April 20th in Fort Worth, Texas. The theme of the year is Life in the Spiritual World, the works of Andrea Lewis. More information at www.spiritistsymposium.org.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the Spirit Andrea Louise, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today. The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
So, dear listener, we are back, and we are back with Michael Tim, and he's telling us much about Leonora Piper, who was a fascinating medium in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. He wrote a book entitled Resurrecting Leonora Piper, and it tells us much. If you want to buy the book, just go to Amazon.com and type it in, Michael Tim, Tymn, and get to know more about it. Michael is the Vice President of the Academy for Spiritual and Conscious Studies. So you can also research on Michael Tim at whitecrowbooks.com. He has a blog there, and you'll be fascinated by it. So, Mike, as much as we get to know of Mrs. Piper, I recall Divaldo Franco, who is one of the most renowned Spiritist mediums of the modern times. I remember being with him at Lilydale, upstate New York, at the Lilydale Assembly, and we were in the museum, and we even have the videotape of this very special moment. We had a few friends who were there with us at the time, and actually Daniel Santos taped in this very natural and spontaneous information that the spirits were bringing on site while visiting their museum. He said to us and to some of the directors of Lilydale Assembly at the time, including the historian of the museum, that Mrs. Piper was present, and she actually came along saying that her biggest mistake was that deep inside she was not truly convinced about the spirit phenomena, to the point that she paid a price for it, because at the end of her life she became deaf. And later in the afterlife she learned that it is because she didn't really absorb the consequences of the implications of spirit phenomena to the inner life. And now she's more fully aware and totally understanding of it. Quite fascinating, huh?
It is. I wasn't aware of that, but what we do know, we really don't know a lot about her in her personal life. Her daughter, all of a sudden her name escapes me, Alta Piper, wrote a book about her in 1929, but it doesn't really say a heck of a lot. And that's one, actually only two books that I know of in English that were written about Mrs. Piper. That one by Alta Piper, and another one by one of the authors or one of the members of the Society for Psychical Research around 1905. He wrote a book about her, but it too wasn't well done, and that was one of the reasons that prompted me to do this book. But as far as her life itself, her daughter gives some indication. And she was a good mother and a very simple woman of the times, not educated. I think she was a high school graduate, and that was it. But there's no indication. The researchers, in all that's been written about her, they've never really said what she believed or didn't believe, and apparently they weren't really concerned as to what she believed or didn't believe. But indications were that she didn't really know what was going on and didn't have a real philosophy herself.
Exactly, and that's exactly what Divaldo Franco explained to us, where she was there on site in spirit telling us. So we have the videotape. Hopefully it's going to be a historical material for all of us. Now, the ultimate question is, actually one of the listeners sent it to us, knowing that we would be interviewing you, asking, if William James had such a reputation at the time as Harvard professor, and he was one of the pioneers of modern psychology, and he researched in a quite compelling way Mrs. Piper, verifying, validating her mediumship, why didn't this become more widespread to the point that other people would make it a fact, a scientific fact?
Yeah, for one reason, William James never came out and in favor of the spirit hypothesis. He sort of sat on the fence all his life. I think he was afraid that his reputation would be damaged if he came out and said, I believe in spirits. So even though Richard Hodgson and James Hislop and Sir Oliver Lodge and Frederick Myers and a number of others, they came out, they said they don't care what people think about them or what the rest of the scientific community says. They believe in spirits. But William James wouldn't go that far. He just said, well, maybe he said, I'm baffled by spirit return. I understand what Hodgson and Hislop and others are saying, but I'm not prepared to go that far. And he summed it up, I think, when he said that it's better to believe too little than too much. And so he left it at that. And then it's the final chapter in my book is William James died in 1910. Then he came back through Mrs. Piper and taught, and through another medium called Minnie Sewell, who was also given the pseudonym Mrs. Chenoweth. But William James communicated quite a bit after his death, and in effect said that he was too conservative in his views. But the bottom line is he was just afraid he was going to damage his reputation if he said too much.
Yeah, I understand that part. But this book is fascinating, and we can tell it's very easy to read, and it brings about facts about life. So would you tell us what is the specific target of this book? Why did you rescue Leonora Piper's story to the general public?
Because I don't think enough people know enough about it, and the skeptic, the person who doesn't want, or the closed-minded skeptic, the pseudo-skeptic is not going to be concerned with this book. I mean, I've already had a few pseudo-skeptics leave comments that they point out that she so supposedly confessed that she was not a real, that she was a fraud, and so where they jump on the negative parts, and so. Yeah. My intent was just to resurrect this story because I think we don't have anything like that now. Society or science just doesn't take an interest in it. So my feeling was that my belief is that all of the turmoil we have in the world today is a result of people who don't believe. And we have a lot of so-called people who say they believe but really don't believe. They don't have a firm conviction. It's just blind faith on their part, and they go about living materialistic and hedonistic lives. And so the reason I'm into this is because I feel that that a belief in the afterlife will help people enjoy life better. And
exactly.
I think this is the best example. The story of Leonora Piper is probably the best example of that, or to show that that there is proof that goes, or evidence that goes beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't get to be more widespread, it's because science still attached to a few features of its own mechanism that doesn't allow it. Its paradigm is very limiting.
Definitely.
Right? So, well, now it's the end of our interview, and if you have questions to Michael Team, just email to us at kardecradio@gmail.com, and we'll be able to relay it to him. If not, you can buy his book, Resurrecting Leonora Piper, at Amazon.com, or read more on his blog at whitegrowbooks.com. Michael, we are very thankful for your presence. We hope to have you here again. You have a great audience here for you. Would you say your final words for Kardec Radio listeners, please?
Well, just that I appreciate the opportunity to be interviewed, and I appreciate all you're doing to help spread the word.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So, dear listener, as you were hearing from Michael Team's words, it was about the 19th century. Nowadays, things are changed, and as Dream Master has just posted her comment here at Kardec Radio blog, for sure, there are more scientists that are becoming more spiritual, but we know science resists. I myself, as a scientist, I tell you, we have a long way to really shifting the paradigm, the beliefs, etc. Right now, we wanted to wrap up this conversation about Leonora Piper and William James by recalling a chapter that was published in the book, Among Brothers of Other Lands. And if you want to buy the book, which was psychographed by Chico Xavier and another medium who was traveling with him at the time to the United States and to England, and they both received messages from the spirits and publishing this book entitled Among Brothers of Other Lands, Chico Xavier and Valdo Vieira, both the mediums. He published it through the International Spiritist Council and the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. You can buy it at ediceiofamerica.com. It's EDICEI of America.com. Among Brothers of Other Lands, Chapter 5, actually, it was André Luiz, the very author of the book No Solar, who interviewed William James in the afterlife, because the question remains, what happened to William James after he discarnated? Because he really had to keep himself on track regarding scientific advancements, and he couldn't give in publicly that he believed in the afterlife. And we totally understand it, because science has a paradigm that needs to be respected, especially at the time. He advanced much the field of psychology, but then in the afterlife, as André Luiz reports here, he kept on working on spirit phenomena. How so? When André Luiz asked William James, "Dear friend, we would like to know if the research of truth still continues to receive your collaboration." And the answer is, yes. After death, we continue to follow the same line of activity that we had on Earth during the last physical experience. If these activities reveal edifying aspects that are able to dissipate the past mistakes we accumulated during previous reincarnations, we should not hesitate to continue broadening them as much as possible, using every resource at hand. And then when André Luiz asks, do you have the same enthusiasm for the study of Spiritism as before? And the answer of William James is, without a doubt, the principles of the new revelation are a field of infinite possibilities. Then André Luiz wanted to understand about his belief on establishing boundaries to the scientific cooperation in the circles of Spiritist studies. And the answer was quite interesting. I do not wish to affirm that the scientific research isn't required. I would rather propose that the researcher can hardly avoid the duty of listening to one's own conscience. A wise person isn't merely a recorder of technical terminology, but rather a spirit endowed with advanced knowledge, which is called by the superior order for the improvement of life. And he has much, much more in this amazing and extensive interview. It's 20 questions with William James by the spirit André Luiz in the book Among Brothers of Other Lands. It's in chapter 5, and you can buy the ebook as well. Just go to Amazon.com or Odyssey of America and get to know more about it. For now, we're going to give a short break. When we come back, we have a very question by a listener who sent to us, how do we develop mediumship? So soon after the break, Kardec Radio responds to your question.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want to find a good way to explain life after physical death to kids or teenagers? Check out the book Message from a Teen in the Spirit World by the Spirit Neo Lucio and Psychographed by Chico Xavier. In this book, a teenager named Carlos explains his impressions on the new life in the spirit realm with his discarnate relatives and new friends. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral, digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
Listen to our sister radio, Bazera Online Web Radio, retransmitting Kardec radio shows 3 times a day. Also, beautiful and inspiring programs in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to www.spiritist.com.
In the book, A Primer on Being Good by the Spirit May, psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier, explains in simple language appropriate for children 2 paths in life, the path of good or the path of evil. God has granted us the freedom to choose either one. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Now we return to our program.
Dear listener, today we're dedicating to reflections on mediumship. We have a listener that asked to stay anonymous, of course for obvious reasons, but she feels very anxious about her mediumship. She has come to know of Spiritism and would like to develop her mediumship. She found a group, but she's not quite sure the pathway into developing it. Well, the first thing we want to clarify here at Kardec Radio Response to you is that it's not an actual development, it's about education. Mediumship is a faculty that is inherent to all human beings, much like intelligence. And we educate it. Well, but that's, of course, you can say, Vanessa, that's besides the point. Well, maybe, but it's about coaching ourselves to higher levels. The first thing we would say, it's about the discipline that is needed for every medium. If you're too anxious and you want to participate in a meeting right away or else, That's the first thing that is important to conquer. Because when we are too anxious, we're not going to do any good in mediumistic meetings, in mediumistic practice, because it's going to vibrate that anxiety and disturb not only the group, but it's going to attune to minds that are not very elevated. When Chico Xavier himself wanted to deepen his responsibilities in Spiritism and broaden his spectrum of mediumship to help people out, Emmanuel clearly stated to him, you need these three things: discipline, discipline, discipline. So without inner discipline, there is no good mediumship. So we would tell those who would like to educate their mediumship or develop it, as they say, it's very important that they educate their inner selves, first and foremost. How? Observing thoughts, observing feelings, and substituting negative thoughts and feelings for positive ones. And this is a test that probably we're going to need to exercise throughout our whole lives. Second, associate yourself with a group, a spiritist center, one that is serious. We have several of them around the world, thousands and thousands of them. And once you do, the first step is get to know of the dynamics of the center. Because some people get into spiritist centers and they think by donating money they're going to be into mediumistic meeting. That's not going to happen. Second, they think just by showing up for a year or two, they are ready, in the prerequisite to be in a mediumistic meeting. No. We need foundational knowledge in Spiritism before we engage into mediumistic practices. So it's important to take courses, read Kardec's books, read André Louis' books, at least all these books before we engage into the mediumistic practice. Otherwise, it's not going to be very productive. Like Chico Xavier himself or Divaldo Franco and others, they really obeyed the order of things. They studied and practiced. They never stopped studying, ever. Chico Xavier himself said that every day he read excerpts of Kardec's books to deepen his understanding about himself, life, and also polish his mediumship. The other thing is, if you're studying it takes time, so there's no rush. And third is respect and get in harmony with the members of the center in which you're affiliated with. Because if that doesn't happen, there will be no way and means to participate in mediumistic practice. Because we need, as Kardec says in item 341 of the Medium's book, conditions to attract good spirits and to prevent bad spirits from coming to meetings, mediumistic meetings. He clearly states that the perfect harmony amongst the members is the number one element. So if people are not getting along, there is no use in being in the same meeting. We need to respect each other, especially the coordinators and directors of the center, because they are the ones whom the spirit mentors are counting upon primarily to execute the plans of reaching out to the spirits in the afterlife and to the incarnates. So if you want to educate your mediumship, we need to go through these very steps that we're mentioning here. I will recap for you. First and foremost, emotional management, inner discipline of thoughts, feelings. So it begins with you. It doesn't depend on anybody else. The medium needs to learn self-control. 2, you need specific foundational knowledge in Spiritism before you engage in any practice. Because if you're blind to the possibilities of what's happening, you won't be as productive. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And number 3, affiliate yourself with a center, not only to study Spiritism, but also to mingle with the people in the sense of become in harmony with them, so one day you can become a member of the mediumistic practice, always respecting the coordinators, the directors of the center who are in charge of the order of things in the center. So these are the main elements for us to conquer great mediumistic development or mediumistic education and productivity as well. When we say productivity, it's about a better life for the medium, for the people who live with the medium, for the people who work with the medium, because the medium is going to be more balanced and centered in his or her own life, followed by productivity reaching out to discarnate spirits and incarnate spirits who are in need of help, assistance, clarification through a very good, well-educated mediumship. If you want to send your questions to Kardec Radio, just email to us at kardecradio@gmail.com or go to kardecradio.com. Our website has a contact form, and you can submit your very question. We will be happy to respond to your questions, since there are so many things to be clarified. Right now, we begin beautiful segments produced for this very program today by Kardec Radio's team, and we're going to begin with Kirsten DeMello and Luis Sergio Marotta. We hope you enjoy it, and if you are there, you want to talk to us, we're live. Just call us at 858-769-4705 or write to us at the chat room of Kardec Radio, blogtalkradio.com/Kardec Radio. We'll be with you at the end of the program when we'll say our prayer together. For now, enjoy these beautiful insights.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to the Spiritist Moment. We are continuing with our reflections in Part 3 of the Spirit's Book, and we are studying specifically the Law of Preservation subcategory entitled Necessary and Superfluous Things. Now, questions 715 through 717 of the Spirit's Book again bring to us this idea of the outlining, the tracing the limits of what is necessary and what is not necessary for us. And in question 715, Kardec asks the spirits, how can people know the limit of what is necessary? And the spirits answer, those who are sensible know it by intuition, but many recognize it at the cost of their own experience. And if you go into the observation of question 717, in this particular section, the spirits tell us something, and we quote, they say, civilization has created necessities that do not exist in the primitive state, and the spirits who dictated these precepts do not mean for civilized humans to live like primitives. In other words, when we're in the primitive state, in the earlier humans, we have very basic needs. We don't have all these superfluous things and necessities that we have now, but yet the Spirit's telling us, well, we don't need to live like primitive people to live simply. Blessed are the simple in heart. And when we use the term simple, we don't mean living in a poor shack and not having any excesses at all. No, in all things there are balance, and we are not talking strictly from a physical or material standpoint, but also simplicity of heart. But dear friends, this concept that the spirits bring to us in this particular subcategory that's entitled Necessary and Superfluous Things really makes us think about the Old Testament, the Bible. And there is an Old Testament book, Samuel. It's the second book of Samuel. And it's the part where it talks about how when King David, a very rich king, had many wives, much land, wound up stealing the wife of a friend of his, of somebody else, who was not a king, was kind of poor, was a soldier. And what happens? Well, after he steals this other man's wife, he becomes frantic because this particular woman whom he had an affair with, Bathsheba, she winds up becoming pregnant. So what happens? King David kind of freaks out, and he sends the husband, Uriah, to try and go and sleep with his wife. He gives him incentives, and he even gets him drunk at one point, according to the scriptural text. And he does all sorts of things, and he realizes, well, there's nothing I can do, so he sends Uriah to basically the front lines and gets him killed. And then what happens? David thinks all his problems are all over, but then this prophet, Nathan, comes to see David. And this is what in Samuel 2, verses 12 and other verses, they discuss how this prophet, Nathan, comes and tells David a story. And he says, David, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb he had bought. He raised it. He grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle. Instead, let us paraphrase, he stole the one little sheep that this poor man had and left the poor man with nothing. So immediately David got angry and said, well, that rich man, we must find him and punish him. He must die for having no pity on the poor man. And the prophet Nathan looked to David and said, David, you are this rich man. Out of all the women in the world, you had to steal this one woman. So it's an old concept. It's an old problem, as Emmanuel in the opening of the book Between Heaven and Earth. And he describes about the book that the stories are not broken. The story, like King David, is not unlike many stories we hear today. Stories of superfluous, of believing we need things when in actuality we don't. As we are studying the laws, these divine laws, we begin to learn what we truly need to be happy. And the spirits tell us in the beginning of these divine laws, studying, practicing, truly feeling these laws are what will guide us towards our happiness and not the superfluous. So dear friends, these are not our words. These are words from the Spirit's book and as well as in the book of Samuel. We merely come to bring the words together to help us to reflect, to be better people in the end. And until next time, we encourage you to read and do your own study and be blessed and feel consoled. Until next time, many blessings.
Blessings of our superior mentors, we pray for their protection under the magnetic hands of Jesus to go on in our reading of the Gospel according to Spiritism. We are in the first chapter, the law. Have you ever heard of the psychological expression superego, my friend? Yes, according to psychologists, the superego is one of the three parts of our psychic apparatus and plays a critical and moralizing role. Freud's theory implies that the superego is a symbolic internalization of the father figure and cultural regulations. But when you are a child, that part of our psyche is not developed enough to play the important role over the personality. That's when we need a father, mother, or someone who can guide us into the world of the right thing to do. By the time Moses, the great prophet of the law, was about to bring us through divine inspiration, the so-called Ten Commandments, humanity was still a child in need of a strong leader like him, so they could start along the didactic process of civilization, playing the role of that superego that humanity in that state of childhood was not able to have yet. But to do that, one very important condition had to be fulfilled: the belief in one God. Yes, my friend, imagine if Moses had received the Ten Commandments to a people that believed in many gods. only some of the citizens could be or could bear the law in their hearts, while many others would not even pay attention to those commands, since they had come from a God they didn't believe in. But there is an aspect that in the future Spiritism would fully explain. Moses found himself in a situation in which someone could come up with the idea of not following the law, since they could not see any immediate consequence to disobeying it. That is why Moses had to make up other laws, the civil laws, in order to show some real consequences to the disobedience of the Ten Commandments, for example. Kardec explains, quote, "There are two distinct parts of the Mosaic law. The law of God as promulgated on Mount Sinai, and the civil or disciplinary law decreed by Moses. The first is invariable. The other, being appropriate to the customs and character of the people, modifies itself with time. The law of God is formulated on the Ten Commandments." And Kardec continues, "This law is for all times, the Ten Commandments, and all countries, and because of this has a divine character. All other laws were decreed by Moses, who found it necessary to restrain his people through fear due to their turbulent and undisciplined nature, and also to combat the abuses and prejudices acquired by them during the period of slavery in Egypt. To give authority to his laws, he had to give them divine origin, as did other legislator or primitive peoples. The authority of man needed to base itself on the authority of God, but only the idea of a terrible God could impress ignorant people in whom the sentiments of true justice and morality were very little developed. It is evident that he, who included among his commandments, "Thou shalt not kill or cause damage to your neighbor," could not then contradict himself by making extermination a duty. This is the first revelation, the law. Well, dear listener, we were those human children back then, but in time our sense of righteousness grew inside us, and later Jesus would say, "You have knowledge that it was said in the old times, you may not put to death, and whoever puts to death will be in danger of being judged. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be in danger of being judged." This is Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. See, my friend, how difficult could have been for Moses or any other prophet to explain the spiritual and material consequences of the law through time? In the next segment, we are going to speak about this, about the interpretation of a specific verse in the Bible that was very well clarified by Allan Kardec, and will tell us a little bit more clearly how to deal with the sense of law and religiosity and its consequences in time. It is clear, my friend, that we have had wonderful teachers all this time, showing the pedagogical process under which we have lived for ages. No wonder the codifier of Spiritism was a pedagogue, an educator. Thank you so much.
We will return to our program after these messages.
The United States Spiritist Council invites you to the 7th U.S. Spiritist Symposium to happen on April 20th in Fort Worth, Texas. The theme of the year is Life in the Spiritual World, the works of André Lewis. More information at www.spiritist.com.
spiritsymposium.org.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Would you like to liberate yourself from your life struggles or to find inner balance? The Inner Journey CD has 3 beautiful visualizations that will help you bring harmony to your life. As Joanna DeAngeli tells us to, live in a way that you leave enlightening footprints in your pathway as if they were stars pointing out the pathway to happiness. To find this CD, go to the bookstore on the Spiritist Society of Baltimore webpage, www.ssbaltimore.org. That is www.ssbaltimore.org, and start your inner journey today.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
A new masterpiece has just been released by EDI-CEI of America, Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira, a phenomenal book about what happens to suicides in the afterlife. Truly instructive, it brings greater hope that no one really dies or spends eternity in damnation. A true account of the mercy and providence of God. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Now available for purchase, the book Chico Xavier, Medium of the Century by Guy Léon Playfair. This is the first biographical and critical study in English of one of the outstanding mediums of all time, through whom more than 450 books were received by automatic writing over a 70-year period, few of which, until recently, were available in English translations. Purchase your copy today at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com.
And now we return to our program.
The following partial recording was taken from the Spirits book by Allan Kardec.
Chapter 3, Creation, the Formation of Worlds. Author's remark: the universe is comprised of the infinite number of worlds we can see and those we cannot see, all animate and inanimate beings, all the heavenly bodies moving through space, and all the fluids that fill space. Author's footnote for fluids. We call fluids those states in which matter is even more refined than it is in the gaseous state. Question number 37. Was the universe created, or has it existed from all eternity like God?
Obviously, the universe did not create itself, and if it has existed from all eternity like God, then it could not be God's work.
Author's remarks for question number 37. Reason tells us the universe could not possibly have created itself, and since it could not possibly be the work of chance either, it must be the work of God. Question number 38. How did God create the universe?
To borrow a well-known expression, by the divine will, nothing can better portray that all-powerful will than those grand words from Genesis. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Question number 39. Can we know about the way in which worlds are formed?
All that we can say, and the only thing you can comprehend, is that worlds are formed by the condensation of matter scattered throughout space.
Question number 40. In accordance with current beliefs, are comets a commencement of the condensation of matter and worlds in the course of formation?
That is correct, but it is absurd to believe in their influence. I mean the influence commonly attributed to them, for all the celestial bodies play their part in influencing certain physical phenomena.
Question number 41. Could a completely formed world disappear and its compositional matter be once again scattered in space?
Yes, God renews worlds just as God renews living beings.
Question number 42. Can we know how long it has taken for worlds to form? The Earth, for instance?
I cannot tell you anything about that, for only the Creator knows. Anyone who claims to have such knowledge, or to know the ages and ages it took to form them, would be very foolish indeed.
The formation of living beings. Question number 43. When did living beings first appear on the earth?
In the beginning, all was chaos. The elements were all jumbled together. Little by little, each thing settled into its proper place. Then, living beings, appropriate for that state of the globe, appeared.
Question number 44. Where did these living beings come from in order to appear on the earth?
The earth already contained their prototypes, which had been waiting for the favorable moment in order to develop. The organic elements began to combine the moment the force that had kept them apart ceased, thereby forming the prototypes of all living beings. These prototypes then remained latent and inert, like a chrysalis or a seed, until the proper time for each species to appear. Then, the beings of each species came together and reproduced.
Question number 45. Where were these organic elements before Earth's formation?
They were in a fluidic state, so to speak, in space amongst the spirits, or on other planets, waiting for the creation of the earth in order to commence a new existence on that new globe.
Author's remarks for question number 45. Chemistry shows us that when the proper conditions are present, the molecules of inorganic bodies unite to form crystals of a consistent regularity according to each type. However, the slightest shift in such conditions is enough to prevent the combining of the elements, or at least the orderly arrangement that comprises the crystal. Why would the same not apply to organic elements? We can store the seeds of plants and animals for many years, but they do not develop unless given the appropriate temperature and environment. We have seen grains of wheat germinate after several centuries. Thus, there is a latent life principle in these seeds that merely waits for favorable circumstances in order to develop. Could this everyday occurrence not have existed since the globe's origin? Is God's glory diminished by the fact that living beings were formed out of chaos by the forces of nature? Far from it. Instead, this fact corresponds better to the idea that God wields divine power over all the infinite worlds by using eternal laws. Granted, this theory does not solve the problem of how the life elements themselves originated, but God guards the divine secrets and has put limits on our inquiries. Question number 46. Are there still creatures that come into being spontaneously?
Yes, but their primitive prototype has always existed in the latent state. You witness this phenomena all the time. Don't human and animal tissues contain the multitude of larval prototypes waiting to emerge as soon as the decay needed for their existence begins? It's a microscopic world that slumbers and then awakens.
Question number 47. Was the human species among the organic elements on the terrestrial globe?
Yes, and it came forth at just the right time. This is the basis for the statement that humans were formed from the dust of the earth.
Question number 48. Can we know the ages in which humans and other life forms first appear on the earth?
No, all of your calculations are purely speculative.
Question number 49. If the prototype of the human species was among the globe's organic elements, why don't human beings continue to appear spontaneously, as they did when they first came into being?
The beginning of things remains one of God's secrets. Nevertheless, we can say that once early humans began to spread out over the earth, they absorbed into themselves the elements needed for their formation in order to pass on these elements according to the laws of reproduction. The same happened with all the other species of living beings.
Dear Kardec Radio listener, my name is Joyce Magalhães and welcome to the segment Spiritism in Your Life. Today we're going to speak about charity. All the Spiritist teaching follows the maxim of without charity there is no salvation. So let's understand the real meaning of this maxim. In the Spiritist book, question 886, it was asked, what is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it? And the spirits clearly answered, benevolence toward everyone, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, and forgiveness for offenses. So, dear listeners, you can clearly see that charity is much more than just donation. It's much more than just give money to those in need, give clothes, food to those in need. It's actually more than all the material things. It's giving love to everyone around us. So charity embraces all our relations with our fellow humans. And the real meaning is on the Jesus' most important commandment, which is love one another as brothers. By doing that, we are experiencing the true charity. St. Paul really understood this great truth so profoundly that he brought to us a letter that is present on the Gospel according to Spiritism on chapter 15, item 6, where he says, even if I were to speak all the languages of men and the language of the angels themselves, if I did not have charity, I would be only like a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I were to have the gift of prophecy and grasped all mysteries, and if I had a perfect knowledge of all things, and if I had all the faith possible to the point of moving mountains, if I did not have charity, I would be nothing. And if I were to distribute my belongings to feed the poor and delivered my body to be burned, if I did not have charity, none of this would be of any use to me. Charity is patient. It is kind and benevolent. Charity is not envious. It is not rash or hurried. It is not full of pride. It is not scornful. It does not look after its own interests. It does not take offense or become upset by anything. It does not suspect evil. It does not rejoice in injustice, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Now, these three virtues remain, faith, hope, and charity, but among them the most excellent is charity. So, dear friends, you can see how inspired was St. Paul to bring to us this beautiful message, where we can clearly find the real meaning of charity. And as St. Paul said, there are two virtues that we really need to practice in our lives. Those are faith, hope, and charity. And as he described, among all them, the most important one is charity. And why is that? Because when you are really able to practice charity, you are automatically practicing faith and hope. There is no way to be truly charitable if you do not truly love your neighbor, if you do not
truly have faith on your heart, if you do not truly have hope within you. So, in other words, charity is actually love in action, is actually faith in action, and it is actually hope in action. And that's why it is so important to really understand the meaning of this simple word, because it is the pathway for our inner transformation. And if we look in all the messages and teachings brought by Jesus, you're going to see that behind all those teachings, we have the principle of charity as the only pathway to salvation. And it doesn't matter your social condition, your current situation, if you are poor or if you are rich, if you are very well educated or if you are ignorant, you can always have many opportunities to practice charity. And remember, friends, charity requires action. Having faith, hope, and love alone is not enough if you do not go and put that in practice in your daily life. And at the end, this is what will enlighten you and bring peace to your heart. So, dear friends, think about yourself. Think about what you do every day in your life. Think about how you use all the opportunities that God gives to you every day. And you're going to see that actually every day is a plenty of opportunities for you to be charitable. And that means that you can be charitable at your home with your family members and with yourself, at your work with your worker fellows, and everywhere you go. By being so, you're going to be a real instrument of love in this life, and you're going to make a huge progress in your pathway of evolution. So, dear friends, let's pray for God to help us to overcome our own difficulties that are still a barrier on the process of our inner transformation. And let's be grateful for the chance of now really understand the meaning of charity and the importance of those words. Love one another. God bless all of us. So be.
Welcome to our Yes, Youth Education Spiritism with Kardec Radio. I am Bernadette Leal, and I'll be spending a few minutes with you, inspiring to bring a spiritual awareness and spiritist teachings to our youth, parents, and educators. Today we'll answer the following question. Why is it so hard for some parents to detach themselves from their children as they grow up? Oh, what a wonderful memory of when a mother delivers her baby and holds her bundle of joy in her arms for the first time. It is a great feeling that connects the child and the parents who surround their child with love. Therefore, it is very natural that parents want to protect their children, doing their best to raise them to become responsible, loving, and successful adults. When raising a child, parents and children bond and develop an attachment. John Bowlby, the first attachment theorist, explains that attachment is a lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Children need a secure attachment when growing up so they can feel protected, knowing that they will receive the comfort and care they need. Studies show that children who did not have a secure attachment during their infancy and growing up have problems with relationships. But although parents want to protect and help their children, overprotection and extreme attachment are not healthy for the parent or the child, leading to codependency and some type of behavior disorder. Chapter 14 of the Gospel According to Spiritism by Allan Kardec, Item 8, explains that the parent's duty is to help with intellectual and moral development of the child in order to further progress. So, let's think about a child progressing by picturing in our minds a long stairs. Then, see yourself and your child at the bottom. Your goal as a parent is to help, teach, and encourage the child to move up the stairs on his own. When a parent is too overprotective and very attached to the child, he's not allowing him to progress. Instead, the parent is keeping the child at the bottom of the stairs or on the first steps. Here are some questions that can help you to reflect upon the level of attachment to your child. Ask yourself, if you died today, and we know this may not be a very pleasant thought, how would my child be? Would he be independent? Could he take care of himself or some basic needs on his own? Does he usually make good decisions? Does he depend mostly on me to make decisions? What about his feelings and behavior? How does he usually handle challenges? And after reflecting on some of these questions and answers without denial, then decide on what issues you and your child need to work on and make some improvement. But preparing a child for life and be able to live one day on his own also involves having moral and spiritual knowledge and be able to put them into practice when needed. Parents should teach their children about love, patience, understanding, forgiveness, and humbleness of heart. And it is very important that they are truly able to treat others the way they want to be treated, as Jesus and many other enlightened spirits who lived on earth taught us. But why do some parents have such a hard time detaching themselves from their children and not allowing them to learn through their own experiences as they get older? Well, one reason is fear. Parents are afraid of not being there to protect their child when he needs, and they would feel guilty if something bad happened to him. Or the parent is very needy, and is the parent who is possessive and wants the child to be his companion, raising the child for himself in a very egotistic way. Parents can also become overprotective because they have high expectations on their child and want to make sure that he will succeed according to their expectations. In fact, there are parents that want their children to fulfill their own dreams. These are parents who had or have a certain passion in life when growing up, or as an adult, they were not able to fulfill their dreams. And now, they pressure their child to be the best at a sport, a profession, or a hobby that the parents always wanted to be, instead of allowing the child to choose their own path. Parents may say that they act that way because they want what is the best for their child, but it is actually selfishness. Remember, a child is a unique spirit with his own goals and a history to fulfill. On the other hand, we also have neglecting parents who go to the other extreme of being very detached from their children. They rely on friends, school teachers, the society, and the outside world to educate their children, denying their parental responsibility and being a failure on raising their children. These parents will answer for their actions when they return to the spiritual realm. Spiritism, with its wonderful teachings about reincarnation, also explains that a strong attachment between a parent and child can be connected with their previous life. A parent who in this present life is in a relationship of mother and son could have been together in the past life as wife and husband. Kardec Radio listeners, it is natural that loving parents want to protect their children, but everything needs to be done with moderation. Too much attachment and overprotection are impediments to a healthy growth of a child. Children learn and mature through their own experiences, even if that means making poor choices sometimes. Keep in mind that parents are here to mentor their children, to educate them, to show and lead them the way, but not to do the work for them. We invite you today to reflect upon your parental skills, your level of attachment to your child, and how much you are helping him to progress in this present life and preparing him for his future reincarnation. Thanks for listening to Yes. And if you have any questions that would like us to answer here in the segment, please email them to Kardec at kardecradio.com.
Free, Dear Listener by James Marotta. And who doesn't want to be free? Free from their own limitations, free from many difficulties and struggles. And that's why Kardec Radio is here to help us liberate ourselves from these attachments, these impediments, these obstacles. And right now, we'd like to invite you to our final prayer. And we often say a prayer at the end of our program to give everyone a therapeutic opportunity of, dialoguing with God and having us all united in one thought, in one feeling, so we can promote greater peace and harmony amongst ourselves. Right now, you may close your eyes if you feel like it. If you can, of course, if you're driving listening to this, don't close your eyes. But if you are home or somewhere quiet, it's a great opportunity for us to make exercises of the mind and the heart. Let us all now visualize the whole universe in the way that it's portrayed in our minds and hearts. And feel the greatness of our loving Father, Mother God, our Creator. Dear Father, we rejoice before you, feeling your greatness and your all-encompassing love. And we are even happier when we get to know that there is so much more for us to understand, to know of ourselves, to know about life, and to experience. Thank you for creating us for happiness and progress. The joy that now is in our souls. We would like you to kindly multiply it in drops of comfort for all those brothers and sisters in humanity who at this very moment on the earth are experiencing true hardships. May these drops of joy caress their faces, their heads, bringing them relief and new hope. Hope that tomorrow, and sooner than they imagine, everything is going to change. That helping hands will come their way, and there is no need to desperate. May they strengthen their faith in you and feel your providence, knowing that they are children of God and you never abandon any of us. We thank you especially for the loving guides and spirits who have been bringing these teachings to all of us on the earth, sometimes with different names, but the same truth of comfort and hope. We thank especially the spirit of Leonora Piper, who subjected herself to extensive research at her time and brings great evidence of our true nature, our universal nature. To Dr. William James, who devoted himself to investigating more about spirit phenomena, and his collaboration with the Spiritist movement around the world from the afterlife. With much to be grateful for, dear Lord, may the whole team of Kardec Radio feel this shower of blessings, as well as our listeners around the world. May we keep on staying tuned with you throughout our days, always boosting our connection with your loving heart. And so be it. Dear listener, next week we have a most special program because we're going to have here an opportunity to talk about how to prepare for death. Many people have been writing us more about the ins and outs of death and how Spiritism brings a solution for us. And next week we're going to share with you how the spirits, such as the spirit of Brother X, Umberto de Campos, he actually wrote a message specifically about it. Training for death, believe it or not. We're going to talk about how you prepare your living will. We're going to also here talk to you about what you should do and what does Spiritism tell us about the best ways to, leave our bodies on the earth. How does it happen? Should we do a funeral? Should we do viewing? Should we be cremated or not? Is there a restriction? What are the behind the scenes of it? It's very important to think about these issues because the body is given to you and you shall learn how to dispose of it, to dispose with kindness, not leaving problems for the ones who are living with us. And to discuss these very important issues with us, we're going to have here Mauricio Filho, who is the president of the United States Spiritist Council. He's going to be here with us discussing the ins and outs of the preparation for death. For now, we wish you lots of blessings in this amazing week because springtime is just coming on the north part of our hemisphere. Let us enjoy because spring is about new hope, new life. Many blessings.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.